Good afternoon again, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sherwin Roberts, your host for this afternoon. And everyone looks so lovely. Uh, this is our best dressed forum. Before we begin, I would like to give a warm and special welcome to our dignitaries this afternoon. His Worship, the Mayor of San Fernando, all the members of the panel, and lastly, you, the audience. I'm extremely grateful for you to be here. Let's get on to business. The purpose for gathering here today is to discuss the challenges and opportunity entrepreneurs in today's economy face. In addition, review of the 2009 midterm budget statement. What differentiates this forum from others is the refreshments. Yeah? Yeah, I'm just kidding. But on a serious note, many forums are done on the topic, how can we boost our local entrepreneur to be more profitable and efficient, which is talk and no walk. Well, this forum, brought to you by the ARU Business Solution, our purpose is to make the talk actionable by integrating a fully functioning solution to your businesses. To help us do so, I would like to briefly introduce our panelists this afternoon. On my left. At this time, I will share the structure of the forum. After all the members of the panel presented, opportunities will be given for questions. Now I invite Dr. Belgrove as he comes to make his presentation. Dr. Sterling Belgrove is an industrial relations consultant, third sector development specialist, civil society engagement consultant, World Bank member, civil society consulting group, and the Inter-American Development Bank. Furthermore, he is the chairman of the Rose Foundation and an MBA lecturer at the Anglo Ruskin University. And just to save time, we just name a few. Please help me welcome Dr. Sterling Belgrove for his presentation.
Thank you very much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. Dr. Nurse, Mr. Mariana Brown, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Vice Ramai, Madam Chair, Ms. Bajal, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good, now I know we're present. My duty this afternoon is a very short and simple one. First and foremost, I want to congratulate this current cohort of the Entrepreneurship and Innovation class, ARU Business Solutions, for, if you may pardon the pun, for doing a very sterling job at this event this afternoon. So let's give them a round of applause. My penny context for you this afternoon is that through these halls of academia, since I've been lecturing since 2010, the MBA program, this cohort will make it 4,000 plus persons I've lectured to over the years, pursuing their MBA. And there's some trends that we observe. And most persons come into the program to pursue an MBA simply for an internal job opportunity or promotion. And when we examine carefully what the program offers, it is building a whole new context of human capital. It is building a base of intellectual capital and assets that we found that the country is not really benefiting from. So we make significant investments through GATE, through the individual investment portfolio. And what we are not seeing is a functionalism in the application of the tremendous wealth of knowledge and innovation and ideas and strategies that is generated through these walls. So this cohort is an attempt to transition from the classroom into the working world, into the business world. How do you take ideas that are generated and incubated during your course of study and use it as a platform for investment and development? How do we add value to the business paradigm that's already existing? How do we enhance their sufficiency levels, their proficiency? How do we contribute to building capacity and capability? And this is a question that we charge and challenge our current MBA cohorts with. It is not good enough as a master to be looking for a job. A master do not serve in an underserved position. A master lead where you lead, others follow. A master creates the opportunity, creates the industry, and set a vision for the future. Masters are the engineers and architects of our tomorrows and the many tomorrows to come. So the values paradigm that seem to prevail upon the psychological orientation for entry into this program requires a lot more understanding of the human capital and its role. So there's a teleological perspective for this journey, purpose. And that purpose must be driven by our understanding of the current realities. And those realities will be seasoned or flavored by our values and our outlook on life. This cohort, therefore, is embodying that concept. We have to do much more than just look at our singular development. We have to begin to consider the good of all, the collective, because we are a part of the collective. It is an ecosystem. And every organism within this ecosystem is just as important as any other organism. We are dependent on some organisms are dependent on us. And if we are to have a better future, a future that is based on our aspirations, our ability to dream, our ability to create and to construct, then indeed we must translate ideas and knowledge into tangibles and intangible values. So ladies and gentlemen, as I invite you this afternoon, relax. We have a very erstwhile panel. I know for you students who are here, you hear me every week, all the time. So I'm going to quit the microphone and allow you to listen to other voices to share their wisdom. The panel here is a very experienced panel. People who have been quietly shaping the future of this country. And something I've been sharing with my students in the last 2 weeks. Poverty boasts, rich is loud, but wealth is silent. They are possessed with a wealth of knowledge, a wealth of understanding. They are knowledge banks. And with that wealth, they tend to be silent, but very effective in shaping our lives, our future, and our destiny. I thank you for coming. And once again, congratulations to ARU Business Solutions on a job well done. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, before we proceed with the next speaker, we would like to introduce to you a dance group. They're going to come with their presentation. Michelle Pilgrim, dance group, Dance Forever. Let's welcome them. 2 minutes and I might have been down there dancing too. I think they deserve another round of applause, yeah? Moving along, I would like to invite Ms. Kirsty Rupnarayan. Kirsty Rupnarayan is an attorney at law with a master in business administration qualification which allows her to provide companies with expert knowledge in both the legal and business sector. She has a significant experience in a multitude of legal areas as well as business development field, including but not limited to marketing, management, project management, and public relations. Let's welcome Kirsty Rupnarayan. My apologies, and she's also a student at the MBA, my colleague as well too.
Pleasant good afternoon to our esteemed panelists. It is a pleasure to have you here. And pleasant good afternoon to you, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. First, I'd like to thank you for your presence here today. We really appreciate it. And also, I would like to tell you that I'm presenting on behalf of our company, ARU Business Solutions. I would like to first share some knowledge with you regarding the implications of the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act, number 1 of 2015. Ladies and gentlemen, so the presentation today will focus on several different topics. And these areas include the process of procurement, the occurrences prior to the passing of the Procurement Act, some salient features of the Procurement Act itself, the implications of businesses, opportunities for businesses, and of course, a conclusion summing up all of the salient points in the presentation. So let us first get started on the definition of procurement. A lot of people tend to associate procurement with the tendering process only. However, procurement can be defined according to the Public Procurement Act and Disposal of Property, number 1 of 2015, as the acquisition of goods, works, or services involving the use of public money. So we know once public money is involved, it is obviously an extremely crucial area in the law and for public interest. So the purpose of this act is to provide for public procurement and for the retention and disposal of public property in accordance with the principles of good governance. Therefore, this act is an attempt to improve our governance and to basically provide a procedure for us because our legislation was lacking on this area in particular. So, as I mentioned earlier, many people tend to associate procurement and tendering as the same thing. However, procurement involves 3 separate phases. These phases are first the definition phase. The definition phase involves the public entity or the ministry basically setting out what they require. So they would provide specifications, designs, and their requirements. They are broadcasted publicly via the newspaper or some other channel. And as they define that, the tendering process then begins. So the tendering process basically involves suppliers or contractors placing bids. And when I say placing bids, they basically set out their capacity and their competency as a company to procure the services or goods required by the ministry. So in tendering, basically, you can either advertise the bid for the public. And if you don't advertise the bid for the public, there is also a selective basis where you can advertise the bid to selected contractors based on their experience. However, this particular method is very much disadvantageous as it goes against transparency and integrity. There's also the sole selection methods. For example, if the ministry requires the billing of a maritime engineering type of project, then they will require somebody with specialty in maritime engineering to solely bid for the project. So basically, the contractors or the suppliers, they send in their bids, and then the ministry or the procurement entity, they evaluate the bids based on the the company's capacity and competency, as I would have said before, and then they select a contractor. So after they select a contractor comes the implementation process. I have a pointer. The implementation process. So the implementation process is, of course, the contractor executing the project itself. So this is why some projects have tended to fail at some point in time, because a company can be very competent on paper. However, when it comes to actually executing project management and strategic planning and so on, they tend to have some overruns and everything like that. So this is a very crucial phase in the procurement process. So this is exactly what the definition of procurement involves, all three phases. And I will remind you, it is the acquisition of goods or services by the use of public money. So, moving on to our next slide. I'm sorry about that. We're having some technical difficulties. But basically, there was a prior process for procurement. So going through the history of the prior process for procurement, I had a nice timeline drawn. You will see it soon enough. But in 1960, there was an increase in internal public sector construction, and that caused some financial difficulties for the public entities, as there was some financial issues that needed handling. And then by 1961, 1 year after, they introduced the Central Board of Tenders. You all may be familiar with the Central Board of Tenders, even though it was introduced at such an early phase. And by 1979, this is post-independence, the Central Tender Board ordinance was amended to allow our government to basically handle their procurement affairs independently. Then from 1991 to 1993, the ordinance was amended again so that there was a special ministerial tender committee for the Defense Force. So the Defense Force would have acquired their weapons and arms and machinery independently of the Central Tenders Board. And from 1993 to, I guess, now, the Central Tenders Board, their functions have been a bit decentralized from when they were incorporated in 1961, as different ministries such as NIPDEC, as you can see here, have taken over their procurement independently. So it was left unregulated, or I would say partially regulated for a while, until 2015, when the Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act was passed. So before the act was passed, there was a process. Yes, the process is similar to what I described before. So before the act was passed, the process basically involved the ministry doing a needs assessment. As you can see here, the ministry had to do a needs assessment to basically set out a budget for what they required. So after they set out that budget and they submit their documents to the Central Tenders Board, the Central Tenders Board would put out an ad or select a contractor to fulfill what they needed. And after this went into the public and the invitations for tenderers were issued, tenderers would place their bids, and then they would select a contractor based on that. So there were several weaknesses in this process, which led to the introduction of the bill in the first place. And the weaknesses really focus on deficiencies in the legal framework, as I would have said before. The deficiencies were actually because the Central Tenders Board, they were actually too focused on tendering. So, as I said, the definition entails 3 different elements. So if they weren't taking care of these 3 different elements, then there is an evident deficiency. And then the second weakness with this previous process is the human resource limitations. So the Central Tenders Boards, of course, they had qualified people going through the tenders. However, there wasn't like a set criteria for them, as you would see later on in the act that it stipulates that they should have. Then there is a lack of general oversight. There's a lack of general oversight. The lack of general oversight came from the Auditor General, at the point in time, used to audit all of the tenders annually. However, it wasn't a comprehensive and ongoing process, and well, this would have been accounted for in preparing the bill, in its drafting. And then there was the inadequate public information. So I'm sure everyone sees tenders advertised or invitations to tender in the newspaper, right? But no one actually knows what they need to do unless you work for some kind of procurement agency. So that was a big deficiency for persons as well, because it didn't broaden the scope to a lot of contractors that did not have access to that type of information. So the Procurement Act was then passed in 2015, and I will be referring to this act as the Act, and it has some salient features that sort out to account for all the weaknesses that I identified before. So I would just be going through the Act very briefly so that you will understand exactly what they tried to do here. So in Part 1, it basically starts as every other legislative bill or legislative act, and it has definitions, but their definitions are very, very specific. So they define everything from procurement to bid rigging to a procuring entity to everything that you can think about, and it is quite comprehensive. Therefore, it is applicable to the layperson, I would say, and is very understandable. Then Section 7, it goes on to set out a scope, basically. So this act doesn't only apply to public entities, it also applies to contracts between public and private entities. And this certainly broadens the scope of our legislation before, because we all know private entities are sometimes deemed pretty untouchable, but this one seeks to account for that. And then there is Section 9. So Section 9 basically imposes a body corporate, and this is called the Office of Public Procurement. And the Office of Procurement is responsible for everything related to procurement in every stage of procurement, as I would have mentioned before. Then there is Section 11. Sorry. Right. There is an error in the slide, I'm very sorry about that. But Section 11 also sets out the functions of all the members and the composition of the board itself. So basically, the office comprises 8 to 11 members. There is a president, and there is a chairperson. The chairperson is the regulator, and the regulator is required by law to have these certain qualifications there. I'm not sure if you could see it on the slide itself, but they are required to have 10 years experience in procurement, as well as a degree, I believe, in accounting and finance. And they also set out criteria for the rest of members. So they have to have a member for accounting, a member for finance, a member for legal, a member for civil engineering, everything. So these things definitely attempt to address the human capital issue that I would have raised before, as there was a lack of that before with the Central Tenders Board Act. Then we move on to Section 12. So Section 12 of the Act, it strengthens good governance and accountability, as it actually empowers the president to remove members of office. So she can remove members of office by basically, if they are alleged to have not performed well, or if they have engaged in any kind of criminal conduct or any kind of offense against the integrity of the Person Act, or any other criminal offense, then she has the power to remove them from the Office of Procurement, which is a big step forward towards transparency and integrity. Then there is Part 3 of the Act. Part 3 of the Act, there is Section 13. Section 13 actually sets out the functions of the Act. So it says what this Office of Public Procurement is supposed to do. So the office is basically supposed to set out a database of procurement. This is called the Procurement Registry, where all contractors can go and register their information, and it is available for public viewing. So it really helps that public access point that I was speaking about earlier. And it also gives them the power to always audit the process and to implement guidelines and everything that you need for the procurement process as well. So as I said before, this helps the access to the public, and this also helps, I guess, opportunities for businesses in the future as well. Then there's Section 3 of the Act, as I mentioned before, Part 3. So this Part 3 of the Act, it strengthens the transparency of the Act because it establishes the public procurement registry that I was speaking about before. So this is available for public viewing, and it has all records of contractors as well. And then Part 4 of the Act. Part 4 of the Act promotes fairness, integrity, and decreases corruption as it allows the office to investigate alleged claims of bid rigging, basically, and collusion. Then there's Part 5 of the Act. Part 5 of the Act allows any contractor to bring forward challenge proceedings, which really enforces human rights and everything like that. So it basically allows a contractor to bring forward a civil claim in court, basically, if he has been aggrieved by any kind of procurement situation, or if there was any kind of alleged breach of the Act. There's also Section 5, yes, Section 5 of the Act. Sorry, this is Part 6 of the Act. Part 6 of the Act relates to the disposal of public property. So it goes on to establish set protocols for the disposal of stores and equipment of public bodies, which promotes regularity and transparency. And Part 7 of the Act is actually extremely necessary as it allows the Office of Procurement to actually form an ineligibility list. So if any contractor is alleged to have engaged in any kind of fraudulence or bribing or collusion, then they can be put on the ineligibility list and not removed from there so that they wouldn't get any other public contracts in future. And there is also an offense in Section 59.2, and the offense says that any person, and the word of person is very important there, so any person to offer a procurement entity or any member or associate of a procuring entity any gift or valuable thing with the intent of gaining an advantage. Sorry? Okay. For himself, basically, can be penalized by the Act. And Section 59.10 also states that anybody engaged in the act of collusion can be penalized by criminal law as well. So, as you can see, this act has been a big, big improvement from what we had in place before because it promotes transparency, integrity, the availability of public information, and it also really moves away from corruption. So there are some very serious implications for business as well. All of these basically encourage opportunities for especially small and medium business owners and also entrepreneurs. So this graph is showing the sectors that contributed towards the GDP the most in 2018. So these sectors actually involved basically trading, mining, and quarrying, petroleum products, and all of that. So all of those products are prime, and they are top in the industry. However, this act actually encourages people to diversify. So if you have to diversify your business, there are many other sectors that you could look into because the Public Procurement Act, it doesn't go towards any one good or one need. There are things such as arts, entertainment and recreation, textiles and clothing. All of these industries have been contributing the lowest towards our GDP in the past year. So the effects of the Procurement Act are basically that it encourages small and medium business owners, and it promotes transparency, and is also a promotion of regional economic growth because there is an initiative basically to move our legislation in the entire Caribbean and to standardize it so that there is one procurement legislation for all of us. So one update is that the Office of Public Procurement that I spoke about has not been implemented up to date. And this has caused some controversy. However, this does not mean that we have to overlook the importance of the Act. It is still quite important. And I would like to conclude by saying that our Public Procurement and Disposal of Property Act may be seen as a small step for our country, but a giant step for the economy, and only time can tell. Thank you.
So you So you guys could see that the ARU business solution don't only just look good, we sound good as well, right? Ladies and gentlemen, excuse me. Now we're going to have Mr. Vijay Ramai. He is going to come and do his presentation. Let us please welcome him as he comes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. His Worship, the Mayor of San Fernando, Mr. Junior Regrello, former Minister of Trade, the Honorable Mariano Brown, and certainly honorable as I have had the privilege to serve with him in the Central X of the PNM. My academic gurus, Dr. Sterling Belgrove, Dr. Louise Nurse, Attorney at Law, Kirsty Rup-Narain, specially invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, a pleasant good afternoon. I would like to express my sincere thanks to some and each one of you for giving me this opportunity to share my entrepreneurial experience with you. Entrepreneurship is a phenomenon that gives significant hope and promise to the growth and development of a country. According to Schumpeter, entrepreneurship plays a crucial role in promoting innovation, creating opportunities, and generating social welfare and development. If you want to become wealthy, you must become an employer and not an employee. Entrepreneurs not only affect the economy and related GDP of a country, but it also impacts society as a whole. Entrepreneurship is associated with creating employment, revenue generation, growth of national income, raising the per capita income of the people, therefore increasing the standard of living. Entrepreneurs are critical for an economy as they single-handedly change the way we live and work, and with their innovation and ventures, which, if successful, will create wealth for a prosperous society and perhaps at the same time positively impact. In other words, reduce the level of crime that plagues a country as we are currently experiencing. An entrepreneur does not only make money for himself or herself, but at the same time assist society both financially and socially. As a businessman, I am intrinsically inspired when I satisfy my social corporate responsibility by giving back to my community and country via donations to NGOs like the Rose Foundation, sporting and cultural groups. My contribution helps such organizations to continue their good humanitarian work. There is sufficient evidence to expose the shortcomings of governments, their social responsibility to the people, that this task has now been assumed by entrepreneurs in the private sector. If you agree with me that entrepreneurship is a phenomenon that gives significant hope and promise to the growth and development of an individual or a country, then you must agree with me that government must pay a sharpshooter focus on entrepreneurship in Trinidad and Tobago. The burning question is, are you satisfied that the interests of entrepreneurs were addressed in the media review? After listening to the entire speech on May 13, 2019 from 2:30 p.m., the only takeaway that I got was a political lollipop that lacks sweetness and hope for entrepreneurs. To me, the objectives, strategies, and tactics of the government is not aligned to what is needed for entrepreneurial support. The entrepreneurship ecosystem needs to be in balance, and in order for us to make that quantum leap to give us competitive advantage on a global platform, our focus should be on building entrepreneurial capacity by creating an enabling environment for entrepreneurs to excel and be successful. I was depressingly disappointed when I heard the Prime Minister made the statement on May 13, 2019, and I quote, "As long as you are dealing with the circumstances of Trinidad and Tobago and its economy for the time being at least, and for the medium term, energy is where your focus has to be." While the rest of the world is moving away from the dependency of oil and gas and embracing a paradigm of diversification and developing entrepreneurial capacity, our leaders are maintaining that energy is where your focus has to be. Peter Drucker articulated, leadership is about the future, while management is about the present. A leader is one whose capabilities must exceed their limitations, and the decisions must be made consciously and not compulsively. Leaders must not allow an outside force to pull their strings. Leaders must display egalitarian qualities, meaning where everyone must be given equal opportunities. In 1988, India was considered to be a third world country. The government at that time decided to place emphasis on entrepreneurship. Today, India is considered to be one of the superpowers of the world. Dubai, whose oil reserves are similar to ours, has adopted that same strategy and zero-down focus on building entrepreneurial capacity. We may argue that culture has a role to play in the Asian progress, and yes, I agree. However, this gives more reason for our government to create a rich soil of culture to germinate the seed of entrepreneurship. Ladies and gentlemen, having established the importance of entrepreneurship, I crave your indulgence on my pragmatic journey as an entrepreneur to help establish the roles that governments play in developing entrepreneurial capacity. I want to share 3 stories with you to help establish the important roles that government play in developing entrepreneurial capacity. Because of the need for achievement, which according to McClellan 1961 is a psychological construct of an entrepreneur, I started selling mangoes at age 9 at the village supermarket while I was in primary school. During secondary school, I became a chicken vendor, and on weekends, and eventually a market vendor. After secondary school, I became a full-time hustler on the streets of Trinidad. Having a strong propensity for risk, another psychological construct of an entrepreneur, I was pushed to embark on a mission of importing foreign used cars from Japan, as this was an emerging trend in the country. The lack of small startup business loan in our banking sector caused me to borrow a personal loan of $40,000 from 2 friends, and I journeyed to Japan to begin this new business venture. Our company successfully landed our first container, and after a few containers, we virtually begged the banks in Trinidad for loans to help improve our business strategy and model, but was turned down continuously. The future seemed gloomy, as we were limited to importing 1 container at a time, when the demand was greater than the supply. Eventually, my intangible resource of brand name and good character convinced me to ask the sacho, or the boss in Japan, for some credit. I spoke to him in Japanese, forcefully, and then he replied to me, "Anata no kokoro wa totemo utsukushi desu." His answer meant, "Your mind is pure, and I will help you with the credit." He gave me 10 containers on credit. What a great opportunity and a chance to grow my business. I packed those containers and hurried back home to look for sales for the cars that were forthcoming. Within 1 week of arriving home, I was able to pre-sell the cars and took advance deposit. I was elated. However, unexpectedly, I was faced with a calamity. The government of the day, without any given notice and consultation, made a policy decision to increase the registration fees from $20,000 per car to $70,000 per car. My customers could not afford this outrageous and without merit increase in price, demanded the refund of their money. Not only did I return their deposits, but had to clear the credit bestowed to me in good faith. I was now bankrupt with my home mortgage to the bank. A young entrepreneur's dream was shattered by the lackluster government policy decision. My containers were abandoned at the port since there were no money to pay the duties associated with the import of a container. I was devastated and struggled. Struggle seemed never-ending. Time to pick up the pieces and start again. Due to the strong tolerance for ambiguity, I started a small construction business and eventually landed a few construction jobs. Again, using my negotiating skills, I was able to secure a credit line for over $1 million from hardware owners. I started tendering for work with government and was able to secure a number of jobs. Once again, my business was on rise, as growth and expansion was evident. I learned from my last experience and diversified my business to mitigate any uncertainty. Between 2008 and 2009, the local economy started collapsing. And with a receivable of over $6 million from the government, my cash flow came daunting halt, and getting paid from the government was almost impossible. Until today, I am still in receivable of these payments. In 2010, an early election was called, which resulted in the change of government. Construction work was slow, and cash flow seemed frozen. Again, I was put in a bankrupt position due to callous decisions by the government. I was forced to sell off my assets and pay off my credit bills, and eventually left with nothing, zero, zip, nil, and any other word that fits the description. I was still in receivable with the monies owed to me by the government. Thanks to my diversification strategy, I relied on a business that I pioneered, which was Indian trade fairs. This business model ushered in new hope and fresh opportunities, not only for me, but for over 60 young entrepreneurs who was interested in doing business with merchants and manufacturers from India. I created an entrepreneurial ecosystem with suppliers and buyers under one roof, suppliers from India and entrepreneurs from Trinidad. A strong value chain was built, and everyone was enjoying the success of networking. As opined by Jack and Anderson 1991, according to them, entrepreneurship experiences enhanced through networking. Moving on to 2015 with another change in government, a new policy decision was once again made to ban the issuance of work permits for Indian nationals coming to Trinidad and Tobago for the purpose of Indian trade fair. Once again, a policy decision smashed an important value chain. Due to the challenges associated with travel to India, language barrier, 90-day wait for goods to prepare and clear customs, over 40 young entrepreneurs closed their business and have resorted to becoming employees and selling doubles and pepper roti. As an entrepreneur, I expected that the government in their mid-year review would address the challenges of young entrepreneurs and offer tangible solutions to their problems. There is a dire need for leadership that can stimulate effective initiatives for entrepreneurs to create that enabling environment that will help in national growth and development. In small steps, big leaps, and solutions to sustainable development. My experience has convinced me that entrepreneurship is a process and not a product. Ladies and gentlemen, if we need to move away from the dependency of oil and gas, we need to create entrepreneurial capacity. Today, we are welcoming Venezuelans with open arms, but suppressing the value chain for our entrepreneurs to have competitive advantage, meaning that the non-issuance of work permits for Indian nationals who form part of the value chain for the Indian trade fairs. In closing, I urge you to use the knowledge that you have gained, as I have gained in the MBA, and help become the agent for change to transform Trinidad and Tobago from its current state to that desired state for the benefit, safety, and enjoyment of your children and grandchildren. We are indebted to our foreparents who work under difficult circumstances and hardship to develop Trinidad and Tobago. Gratitude is when the memory is kept in the heart and not in the mind. The only way we can show gratitude to those who build Trinidad and Tobago is by ensuring that we continue the path for our future generations. Thank you.
Moving along now, we're going to introduce Dr. Louis Nurse, who is a project manager specializing in the execution of public sector projects as well as project governance. He is also a senior lecturer in management studies at SAMS. Furthermore, fun fact, he's a soca jazz panist, also known as Magic Fingers. Help me welcome Dr. Nurse.
Thank you, Mr. MC. Chairman, Mr. Bargrove, Honorable Mayor, San Fernando, my former boss, Minister of Finance, Mr. Mariano Brown, Ms. Melanie Bridgewell, Chairman of the ARU Business Solutions, Ms. Krishni Rupnarayan, Mr. Vijay Ramai, other members of the head table, and to you, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Well, we're chatting about opportunities and challenges based on the current situation in our country. And I want to focus on the opportunities. I don't see any challenges. The main challenge that we all face is our mindset. The problem is there are two types of people in Trinidad and Tobago. There are those who create employment, who create innovation, imagination, and apply their brain power to identify new opportunities, and they call these people blue ocean people. Those are the people who see the cup half full because they look for the half full. Then they have the consumer side. Those of us who spend our times, our lives buying, using the foreign exchange for our cars and everything. And I call that the complaint side. So the first challenge that we have is to address that mindset that comes from dependence and years of patronage, where our people have become comfortable, compliant, and extremely uncompetitive. They have found themselves sitting with their hands out and their brains shut down. So the Minister of Finance in his 2019 midterm review actually laid out some of the key value drivers that will take us into the second decade of the 21st century. The first one, he established that the government's development program, which comes under the public sector investment program and the supplementary public sector investment program. One is driven by state sector and the other one is driven by the ministries and the consolidated fund through the infrastructure development fund. So what you have in the state sector, we're looking at the change of Petrotrin. Because I want to argue that the minister is facing an obsolete economy. He's facing a $23 billion deficit between expenditure and income. And the key value drivers that initiate our economy, one of which is oil and natural gas, in my respectful view, are already obsolete. So we're talking about Petrotrin and oil and gas when Venezuela have billions of barrels under the ground, and somehow it's not happening for them. The reason is the world has gone electric. Electromagnetic energy and energy from light is now current. Flying cars are running in Dubai. Jetsons, it's happening in Dubai. So all these cars that we're buying, right now there are 4.5 million vehicles in America parked up because people have stopped buying the old stock and they're now buying electric cars and modern cars. So what is happening is that if 180 million vehicles around the world become converted to electricity within the next 2.5 to 3 years, what's going to happen is that the demand for oil and oil-based deliverables is also going to decrease. So yes, we're talking about more oil exploration and more natural gas, but we are talking about old technology that is already disrupted by the new technology, which is electromagnetic energy. And just think about this, friends. Do we need tea and tech if you have a solar panel on top of your roof? And if you think about that, you'll recognize that even the centralized type delivery services from which the government has built its whole value system is also obsolete. Because if electric cars come into the country in droves, that means every gas station closed down. That means NP closed down. That means people who have engine products and oil, all the bamboo and all these people, they all closed down because electric cars don't have mufflers, don't have radiators, and don't have transmissions. So one of the things that the minister tried to do is to hold back that momentum of change in his budget by allowing the continuous high cost of these combustible engines to continue for the next 5 to 10 years. That's why we're selling the cars for 7 years turnaround time. The other thing that the minister did was talk about all the big investments. We have $1 billion that's going to be spent on a hospital, where the Chinese loans are coming in, and those things are leading to development activity. So you have $1 billion hospital. And the question we have to ask ourselves as entrepreneurs is that we have to identify where the opportunity is. If the government is building $1 billion hospital, where are we? What service can we provide in that process? If the government has decided to pay VAT, they're going to borrow $4 billion to pay the VAT owing to companies. And part of that reason is to make sure that the banks continue to be fluid, because the banks are under IFRS 9, which means that all accounts receivable becomes subject to risk provisions. So the government can't afford that, because the government is a 52% owner of Republic Bank and a large percentage owner of First Citizens Bank. So as a result of those two things, they must make sure the bank make money, because he gets 35% tax on top of that. So what do? He's borrowing $4 billion to pay the VAT. The VAT will go into the people's accounts, and it will pay off those contractors, and the credits that was given to the bank will also be removed. He's also paying $80 million for pensions, because lots of people who have had pensions have left the public service and they can't get their money. As a result of that, he's now put some money in there. So therefore, there's some money that will be going into the hands of pensioners. So entrepreneurs have one objective. They must identify where the money goes so that they can now put a product or service to those people so that they can make some money themselves. The other thing that the minister has done is he's borrowing money. Notice I used the word borrow about 3 times. He's borrowing money to pay contractors. Now, we've had contractors who are they're ready now to do a development program. The government is funding the highway to Toko, the highway to Point Fortin, the Sandy Grande. He spoke about all these things in his presentation. And all these projects require contractors whose capacity has been decimated by the fact that they're being owed money by government. So he's borrowing money to pay those people, and those people will be able to pay the banks again and clear those bank debts, which means that in 2019, banks will be able to declare higher profits, because it was projected that if they apply the IFRS 9 effectively, banks this year would have declared much lower profits, which is not good for Trinidad and Tobago because of NIF. Remember, 52% of the dividends that comes from Republic Bank goes into a fund which people paid borrowed money against. So the important thing for us to understand is that we are in a borrowing cycle. And that borrowing cycle over the next 2 years is going to create an artificial demand, an artificial growth, because 5,000 houses are going to be built by the Chinese, right? But where are the opportunities? Let me show you. When they're going to build these houses, all the bricks going to come from Ansa Makal, because they have Best Street and all the bricks. They have the paint factories. They have Abel with all the windows. So in other words, they have the Forex construction methodology. That's what's used by NH. So if you notice, our sense of entrepreneurship is not just about building entrepreneurs. It's about getting people who understand the type of businesses they want to be in and are properly strategically planning how to get in with the right resources and equipment. So when you hear that the government is doing something, the government telegraphed, for example, that next month they're going to bring to Parliament legislation to introduce the medical growth of marijuana. Now, the oil and gas economy was pushed on TV. That means that there's a great opportunity in terms of a new industry that is being brought to Trinidad for the production and sale of medical-based marijuana. How many of us have paid that any attention? So the big challenge in Trinidad and Tobago, in my respectful view for entrepreneurs, is not just about the training and understanding, but it is also the issue of having the mindset to look where opportunities are being telegraphed and put ourselves in place. One of the challenges that we do have is the issue of compliance. I'm happy to hear my sister talk about the procurement legislation, because the procurement legislation is linked to the Procedure of Crime Act and the Integrity Bill. There are 18 pieces of legislation which the government of Trinidad and Tobago has passed: unexplained wealth, non-profit bill, anti-gang legislation. All those things were passed within the last year. But what it does, it represents a suite of integrated laws that changes the compliance requirements for business activity in Trinidad and Tobago. That's the big issue. That for us to be able to do business, there is a criteria in law that says what eligibility is. There's also criteria in law that says what your assets and liabilities should be. And there's also criteria in law that says what your process is supposed to be. With penalties, and when I read them, it was amazing. It is not just about 50,000 fine, it's 50,000 and 5 years in jail. So they have created laws that reinforces corporate behavior. So corporate governance is no longer about entrepreneurship and you have a good idea and you're going to try to do it. You need to know clearly all the laws and what the suite of compliance requirements are. And the minister spoke about that because he gave a tax amnesty. And in saying the tax amnesty, he reminded Trinidad and Tobago, put your company house in order, put your personal taxes in order, because the revenue authority is coming. So that while we are discussing entrepreneurship, we got to look at the issue of tax evasion, tax avoidance, and the new money laundering. Money laundering goes with tax evasion and these things. So that the laws, again, under the Proceeds of Crime Act, ties us up. So everybody now has to put their income tax in order because the next tax is coming is your property tax. The property tax, the Chief Minister has spoken about, the Prime Minister has made it very clear, goes to the heart of ownership of your property. And many of us are doing businesses, be living in homes that we have not defined the ownership. Yes, it was my grandfather's house. He died. My mother went to the States, and I live in the house now. Whose house is it? Nobody knows. Well, in law, it actually says that you have to have the beneficial or the obligor or the beneficial owner of any asset or property. So it means that everybody, entrepreneurs and otherwise, have to go out there and ensure that the properties that they own are properly vested in something. Because if it is not vested under the unexplained wealth, they can take it from you. So an entrepreneur could do his very best, build up his assets, and doesn't document it properly, and a police, under the probabilities, is no longer proven beyond guilt. It's about the law probabilities. Could come in your house and seize your assets because they think that you thief it from somebody. So I'm saying to you that when we talk about the opportunities, the key thing for us in terms of our blue ocean thinking is to identify the things that will earn foreign exchange. And one of the things that is earning foreign exchange is the new digital economy. It's on the net. Everything is on the net. Amazon is on the net, $1 trillion company. Facebook is on the net, another $1 trillion company. The companies that are moving into the second decade of the 21st century are the digital-based companies, which means that this new market space that is available on your phone, that's available on your computer, that's available on your online, is where the first generation of income, foreign exchange earning opportunities are. It's not about just exporting a tangible product, but it's carnival, costumes, or something like that. We're talking about identifying in the digital space. I know 2 Trinidadians who are making real good money, blogging. Every day they get up and they talk some foolishness, and some people seem to like it. And not only that, they're now calling them influencers. So advertisers are paying them to influence because of the amount of people that they have in their support. So I'm saying, in looking at the entrepreneurial opportunities, we look to the digital market space. We look to our compliance requirements on the new laws in Trinidad and Tobago. We look carefully at government's policy, where the government also, in the last midterm, increased their budget by $3 billion. So $3 billion more is being spent. And in case you all didn't notice, the government is spending from September 2018 to September 2019, $53 billion. So where's all this money going is a question we all ask. That's not the question I ask. The question is, how much of that money should come to me as an entrepreneur? What product or service can I identify that will be legitimate, that will be compliant with the new laws and regulations? Forget the energy sector. Consider that a dead donkey. We're looking back. That's a looking back story. I saw Roger yesterday in Port of Spain, and I sympathize with him. Right? Somehow he's not as energetic as he was before. Right? So forget the energy sector. Look now at the indigenous sector. Look back at your agricultural sector. Why? Because if we're going to put 5,000 houses, 3-bedroom houses down, those are 5,000 new customers that need 5,000 fridges, that need 5,000 TVs, that need 5,000 beds. You see how the market comes? And those 5,000 people are going to need food because their yards wouldn't have enough space. So agriculture is a big thing, especially if we push in more tourism and more event activity. And agriculture is not about planting potatoes. We now have hydroponics. We have a whole new list of agricultural models that are quite relevant to our times. So you have agriculture, you have fishing, yes? You have the area, all these are the supply areas. Mangoes. If you think it's jokes, think about Mr. Blue Waters, who planted 100 acres in coconuts. And he's now providing coconut water to everybody. Coconuts. In case you're not aware, a coconut vendor around the savannah sells 1,000 nuts on a Friday at $10 a nut. So when we look down at the coconut man, we better be careful. He's making $10,000 one night. Some of us are making that in a month. And he's making it in cash with no tax. So I'm just sharing with you that there are opportunities, but we need to shift our vanity, shift our mindsets into identifying what is the need of our customers. Because that's what the Chinese do when they open the restaurant in a place that you didn't think a restaurant could happen. You just pass one day, it's an old building, next day you pass a Chinese restaurant. When you pass back, it's a Chinese grocery. They call it happiness now. See? And these people come into your country and identify it. And if you notice, the Venezuelans are doing the same thing. Because when the government gives the Venezuelans the license to work, not the license to vote, as some people think, the license to work, your service industries, which is all your bars and all your restaurants, now have labor that's dedicated. And the difference is, those people come here to work, like the Chinese who come here to work, they don't have no Baptist holiday, Eid holiday, Diwali and all them things, because they're not Muslim, they're not Baptist, and they're not Hindu. So these people come to work. So their productivity is much higher. The Trinidad Tobago Manufacturers Association clapping right now because they're going to get staff. And do not think that the people who are coming from Venezuela are not trained people. The first thing in Venezuela is that when you reach 18, you join the army. So all them young fellows who come in here are trained people. And they're trained with skills. So now Trinidad and Tobago is seen as socio-economic change. Engineering is called, socio-economic engineering, where the Venezuelans are coming in to take care of the service industries. So it means you have labor to do your construction. When it happened in the Red House, somebody said that they were illegal then, and if you remember, it came out a big thing. But now, the contractors have labor, not just the Chinese have the Chinese, but we have Venis who could work and who are capable, competent, and ready with productivity and delivery and quality. So there is a lot of opportunities in our national budget that's going to take us to 2020. Remember, 2020 starts on the 1st of October. When we enter 2020, you have a $150 million project in San Fernando where your Skinner Park is going to be developed, $150 million spending, right? You have the San Fernando waterfront project that's also being delivered. So you have the Labre port that's being done. You have the Point 14 hospital, the Point 14 highway. You have the interchanges that are being done in the CUREP. You have the highway going to Valencia. We have the engineering. The last couple of weeks, you have seen the EMA discussions in the newspaper about the new Toco port. In other words, a lot of stuff that the government has been discussing is now being implemented, being contracted, and being put on the table as part of our economic stimulus. So I invite you all to look carefully, forget the doomers and gloomers, look carefully at where the opportunities are, and they are there listed out, and to ask yourself what service or good that you're going to provide to support the development of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time I'm going to call on Melissa Bridgelal to introduce our next panelist.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Fellow ARU board members and members of the panel. Before I introduce our next speaker, I would like to talk a little bit about him. He is Mr. Mariano Brown, the Executive Chairman of Leader Management Services. Mr. Mariano Brown first entered Parliament in December of 2007 when he was appointed Minister in the Ministry of Finance. He has over 25 years of experience in finance and banking. On March 9, 2009, Mr. Brown was appointed Minister of Trade and Industry in addition to his previous portfolio. During the 10th Republican Parliament, Mr. Brown served as a temporary opposition senator. Mr. Brown is a graduate of the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus with a degree in economics. Prior to his appointment as minister in the Ministry of Finance, Mr. Brown was the Chief Executive Officer of the Bank of Butterfield in Barbados. He is also a fellow of the Institute of the Chartered Certified Accountants in the UK and holds an MBA in Finance from the University of Wales and Manchester Business School. He has also served as president of both the Barbados Bankers Association and the Barbados Institute of Banking and Finance. With a special love of sports, he is a deputy chairman of the Barbados National Sports Council. He has published and presented several papers on banking and finance, including a presentation on managing banking crisis to the plenary session of the 15th World Congress of Accounts held in Paris in October 1997. He has also been involved not only in planning and startup of a new financial institutions, but has also been involved in several turnaround situations in the finance industry. At this time, can we warmly welcome Mr. Brown?
His Worship the Mayor, Moderator, Mr. Belgrove, members of the panel, ladies and gentlemen. First, let me start off by apologizing for my attire. I thought I was coming to a mid-afternoon presentation, stroke little lecture, and we'll have a little conversation. I had not anticipated anything this formal. And I want to tell you that I've done panels, I've had discussions at UWI, at Cave Hill Business School, at Manchester Business School, at Columbia Business School, and at MIT. And I've never been, how shall we call it, so underprepared in terms of attire or in terms of understanding exactly what was required for the afternoon. So I want to tell you that Sam is way ahead at the moment, right, of MIT, Manchester Business School, and UWI. Having said that, I'd like to thank the panelists for putting a number of things on the table. And I was remembering my time. I was hoping that, Vijay, that none of those decisions you talked about I was part of. right? But it does say that we are at risk from a policy perspective in small economies. Decisions made at government level do sometimes have some very strong ripple effects, not only in terms of emerging industries, but also in terms of sectors which are not necessarily transformative, but which have been around for a little while. Now, the real issue, and I like the point you make, Drucker is one of my favorite authors in business, and he made the point about leadership is about the future, management is about the present. But I also want to put a couple of things on the table from a point of view of entrepreneurship. And it's the issue about effective decision making, the issue about failure. And failure is an indispensable guide to success. Because most times people figure that you fail once, you make a decision and you have a two-path lane. It's either success or failure. And unfortunately, the road has many branches and many forks. It has, as he pointed out, it has many failures. Right? But if you don't persevere, you surely can't win. The bottom line is that the only time that you could ever succeed is if you stay in the game. So that, how do you stay in the game? And risk of failure is strong, is high, particularly in small economies. And what, unfortunately, we also get is a reputation for failure. The literature is clear from entrepreneurship that in order to succeed, you must fail. Because that's one of the only ways that you will learn the lessons that will tell you where to go and how to go. And just to put it on the table, it is not only new and small entrepreneurs that fail. We have several examples of large corporations that have misread the future. So let's just start with the digital watch. It was invented by who? Most people would think it was the Japanese, but it turns out the Swiss invented the digital watch. Who benefited from it? More often than not, the Japanese companies did. Who invented the instant camera? Who invented the digital camera? Well, guess what? It turned out Kodak. What was his key business? Paper. Did Kodak survive? It didn't. It created a future, an alternative future, but it was so wedded to the present that it never saw the possibilities for the future. Similarly, and this is the point I think that was raised by my colleague, Dr. Nurse, that at the same token, we are in the middle of what we would consider to be hydrocarbon age. And we are beginning to see a completely new future, which essentially requires us to move away from where we are, what we have been accustomed to in terms of the use of hydrocarbons, and in particular, the gas-fired engine. When I say gas, petrol-fired engine and or diesel. To move to a different sort of future, which is based on a completely different methodology moving forward. And in a sense, Trinidad Tobago was one of the leaders in that regard by using or moving towards the establishment of gas and exporting LNG. But that future for us has also changed because the future is never constant. The only thing that is constant is the fact that things will change. And we find ourselves in a situation where our new competitor was our largest importer. This is the US, which is now, because of the shale gas revolution, is also a net exporter of natural gas and a net exporter of oil. This was a country that guzzled oil, but has found itself in a position where it is now the largest producer of oil. Things change. So the fundamental issue is that from the point that we're talking about an entrepreneurship, we also have to understand that entrepreneurship and success is a destination. It is not necessarily a goal in itself that you will achieve as you start off or even on your ongoing trips. You will have to face changes on an ongoing basis. And the country is in the midst of that change now as we speak. And in many ways, we haven't begun to talk about an alternative future to where we are. And I want to say that because in many instances, the projects that we're talking about, we have to ask the question as to whether do we need another port in Toco in relation to, we already have one on the southeast end, or the southeast, as distinct from the northeast, and that's Galeota, which was built with exactly the same sort of objective in mind. So if I ask the question, if Galeota was meant to be the staging point for new exploration and development, let's ask the question. We have Guyana taking off, we have Suriname where there's a lot of exploration, and a number of other areas in which exploration is taking across the Latin American coast. Where is the staging point? Well, it's not Galeota. It's Chaguaramas, which has been a natural deepwater port for Trinidad and Tobago certainly since 1792. When Abercrombie came, that's where the ships were. They weren't in Port of Spain, they were in Chaguaramas, because it's a natural port. But at the same token, we've missed the opportunity for development, and if we have to retrofit it, it's going to cost us billions. But at the same token, it still remains a natural port, natural deep water. We don't have to dredge it. Everything that comes in the Port of Spain passes through those channels, and those channels aren't dredged, and it can take any kind of ship that comes through because its berth and its depth is sufficiently large to have that type of capacity. So let's just take a couple of examples in terms of changes and in opportunities that come by and how do we approach them. And how do successful entrepreneurs in small countries survive? And you'll notice I'm not speaking without any notes, and I did that deliberately. I was trying to borrow Mr. Nurse's phone so I could look up the last article I wrote, which had some quotations which I thought would have been value. But I took the precaution of leaving all those things in the car so that I would be able to respond to some of the things that were said here today and also to give the benefit of some of my experience. And in that regard, there are two articles that I want to point to. One is in 1967 from Mr. Drucker, which is called The Effective Decision. And the other one is one that he wrote in 1994. I think he was in his 80s, if not his 90s at the time. It's called The Theory of the Business. And he makes some very simple points. And he says that you have to make decisions. Sometimes you have to look for the broad parameters that are consistent, and you have to address what those parameters are as distinct from looking at the specifics of a problem. In other words, there are certain things that have to, certain commonalities that you have to approach. That when you make the decision, it solves not one, but several items, and it perhaps be more of a direction than it is a specific decision. In the theory of the business, he talks about how do we approach business. And he's saying that the one thing that has to be consistent in every business at every time is that we have to have our mission or vision clearly understood, and it must fit reality. In other words, we can't be talking about cars driven by petrol in an era when we're talking about cars which are going to be driven by electric power. So that if you have a theory about, and this is the difficulty that is facing all the car manufacturers, how do we find ourselves, how do we transition our way into driverless cars? And guess who is doing the pioneering work? Well, it turns out to be Google and or a new company that has started up altogether. Right? What does that leave the General Motors, the Chevrolets, the Fiats, the Renaults of this world? They are in a difficult situation. So that your business theory and your vision has to fit in with the external reality. And if the external reality is changing, guess what? You have to change too. Which puts Trinidad and Tobago from that position. We also have to consider what is our future. Because the high point in terms of gas was 4.2 billion scuffs, and that was in 2011. The outlook for this year, at best, is 3.9, which does not even meet our installed capacity. So that if we are thinking that, and we want to depend on government and government revenues for the future, that's not what is in position. So we have to start thinking about an alternative outlook. And also too, carrying on from that particular point, not only must you understand what the reality is, but whoever is in your organization has to understand what you are doing, where they're going, and they have to understand the theory, and they have to understand their role in it. In other words, it's about coordination. It's about getting people to buy into a view, to get into a vision. And also to ensure that you survive, you have to keep certain that whatever it is you're doing fits with reality. What are the changes around you? So it requires us to have a future positioning. So this is an entrepreneurial decision made today. It's something that is going to last for a little while, and you have to adjust it. So are there any successful examples in the region of entrepreneurs who have gone global? And the answer is there are. And the most successful one comes from one of the smallest countries in the region. It comes from Barbados. He does not want his story to be told. I used to be, I'd say, part of his financier when I ran a bank in Barbados. And I have to say he rescued me. I came to him a day. I was in a difficult situation. he needed to have additional facilities, and I was not in a position to be able to provide him with what he needed. So it would have been very embarrassing for me to tell him, I can't finance your business, and it would have been very embarrassing for him to tell me, I want to move my business. So we came to an appropriate compromise. So that he left me with some of the business that I could finance, and he moved, and in fact, he didn't even need external finance, and he was able to do it himself. He had grown so big. How did he start off? He started packing grocery shelves. And then he got into a gas station. He ran a gas station, and he used to pump gas himself. And then he started to sell cars. Not imported used, new cars, but cars and brands for which nobody was really interested in. Suzuki, Skoda, those kind of cars. And he did so well as establishing those brand names in Barbados that he was given the capacity and became the dealer for selling them across the region. So when Suzukis were being sold in Trinidad by Neil & Massey, Neil & Massey was the domestic dealer. The dealer for Neil & Massey around the region was headquartered in Barbados. And he took advantage of some of the changes from a policy perspective in government by establishing himself as an offshore corporation under the offshore legislation. And he effectively would become what we consider to be a distributor. And when Suzuki wanted to expand, and to expand into Latin America, he had done such a good name, because Suzuki, by the way, is not a well-recognized brand in Japan. It's a sort of like a fourth-tier company. People would buy that. I can't imagine a comparison right now. It skips me. But let's just say that in 1970, Toyota was not a good name in Trinidad. It became a good name later. So here we are, Suzuki. And he expands, and he starts taking on, and he enters into arrangement with one company in North America, small, and they started off in Brazil. Take a guess at how many cars he used to sell a day. 100, 150, 200 cars. He's selling, the total number of cars he sold in Latin America on a daily basis in 1993. 1993. Not a growing market, because Latin America at that time was actually in depression. 1,000 cars. 1,000 cars. But that's only for Suzuki. Now, I want to tell you that his success became so phenomenal that he also is now the agent for Suzuki, Mercedes, Mitsubishi, Audi, and a few other things. Chrysler. You know those new Chrysler cars that's being sold by Lifestyle Motors? Well, all of them come from a company headquartered in Barbados. And he became so successful that he also, when Shell was exiting the region and selling off Shell's distribution network, that he bought it. And he renamed the Shell network Sol. They didn't use a shell, but they used a little sun on a white background. Sol. And it was sold last year to a Canadian registered company for a couple $2 billion. And that means he sold only 75% of the company. And I think the figure was about $3 billion US. That means his other 25%, which he did not sell, has a market value of about $1 billion US. Now that's all being run in the course of a 40-year business experience, and we now know that the value of just the Sol that he bought and sold, and let's say he bought it for billion, let's assume he bought it for $1 billion. He didn't buy it for $1 billion, but just assume that. It means that his net value at this stage is $3 billion US. There is no other entrepreneur in this region that has any experience of that nature. And that is including Mr. Butch Stewart with Sandals, who is probably the next best one. And Mr. Stewart didn't start off in the hotel business. Mr. Stewart started off in the days when we were assembling irons and microwaves, not microwaves, and ovens and a few other things in the region. That's what he started off as. And when that business died, as life cycle goes, because the margins dropped out of the business and they could be done much better by, guess whom? The Chinese, by everybody else. He came out of the business, and they kind of got into the hotel business on the side, and then developed a methodology and a particular frame which was suited to Jamaica, and they've exported the model around. And that has made him a multi-millionaire. But he does not beat my friend. The name of the company in Barbados is called Simpson Motors. The company which does all the work that we don't know about is called Inter-Americana Trading Corporation. And just for the record, he also has the largest dealership of BMWs in China, which is the largest BMW dealership in the world. That's all being done out of an office in Barbados. As a result of which, of course, he has hired people from all over the world to basically help him run his business and help it run it a little better than he is. And when last I spoke to him, because we're still friendly, and I asked him, I said, we need to document your experience so that it would serve as a lesson for others who could come in your footsteps. And he said to me, Marianne, I don't want anybody to know what I'm doing. All right? It is good that they don't know, and I would like to leave it that way. And if you ask him what is the reason for his success, he will tell you one thing and one thing only. It is not me, it is the Lord. All right? So I can never get any kind of documentation in terms of tell me the steps that you took or what you did. So I want to leave that little experience with you. So it's not to say that it's impossible if you live in a small island, with, in that case, 270,000 people, that you could become a multimillionaire, a billionaire. The object for him wasn't only about wealth. He actually believes that it is his testament to his life on earth in the service of God. Something to remember. It's a very humbling point, and I take it very seriously. Now, having said that, where are we in Trinidad and Tobago? How do we move forward? And what do we do? Quite clearly, the most important issue for us is foreign exchange. So how do we find an inflation-proof business? Now, the interesting thing about Kiffin Simpson's business is not that it is novel, it is not that it is new, but he found a different way to do it. A different way to do it in a sense that was helpful and influenced by government policy. He established an offshore company that was able to service the requirements around the world. What was the key to his business? Service. He was able to understand what a customer wanted, and he was able to deliver that product. He was able to deliver that product, and able to deliver that product with value. And when I say value, it met the value proposition. The Suzuki van, in Barbados context, was a little 1100cc van. But its purpose was the sizing and the structure. You could put almost anything in it. And people started moving their homes, started doing business out of an 1100cc vehicle, literally, small vehicle. And of course, we know that the company has gone up market now. We have the Vitara, which is used by our police service as well. So we know that the company has developed over time. But the point is, he found a market niche, he found a customer demand, and he found a customer order, and he was able to convert that into a business which has made him a billionaire. Did he only do it with Suzuki? Well, the bottom line is, once he was able to do it with one product and he understood what was required, then he built an entire business line, not only in Barbados, but around the world in terms of being able to deliver service to all of his distributors, because they then became his distributors. And that's an example also of a vision. A vision. When I went into his boardroom, the thing that struck me, I was meeting him for the first time. I was taking over a bank that literally had failed on its feet, and I had to find a way to keep it to survive. He was one of my best customers. How am I going to go and to have this story with him? And I walked in, and the one thing that struck me in his boardroom, he didn't have a map of Barbados. He didn't have a map of the Caribbean. He had a map of the world. He had a concept of what he was going to do and where it was going to carry him. And he was not limited by geography. He was not limited by the smallness or the size of his island. He was limited only by his capacity to envision a future that was different. And that's the one thing I think that we have to take into consideration when we talk about entrepreneurship. We are in difficult times. But difficult times end. What makes the difference and what makes us come through this situation and be able to survive this situation is our ability to conceptualize the future and our place in it. That's why I like Vijay's comment about leadership is about the future. That's what it's about. It really is about conceptualizing a different future. And many times you conceptualize something which most people will not understand, and they will consider you crazy. A lot of people considered Einstein crazy. Right now, we know that the black hole is not merely a theory, it exists. Because we've now begun to see and find black holes. They could actually tell you its mass, its existence, how it was formed, etc., etc., etc. But at the time, it was simply a thought, something that could happen. Now we know it is not merely a thought, it's something that could happen. We know that it exists. Some people are able to do that. And that's why they are unique, they are different, and that's why we need to treat them specially. We don't always recognize them. They come to work, opportunities come to us dressed in working clothes. So it is really how do we take the opportunities that come to us and turn them around? How do we make something out of them? And they are all built on a simple theory of the business. So the bottom line is you need to understand the theory of the business that you want to build. You may not get it clearly. You may not have it ideally structured at this point. But if you don't stick with it, you won't have one. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. I had the chance to take a glance of Mr. Brown's achievement, and I started calculating, like my age and how long it probably may take me to achieve just a few of those, Mr. Brown. And the thing is also, when you're good, I only have about a couple items on a page here that I need to look at before I even come up here. And Mr. Brown carry on his whole presentation without a paper. So that is good, that is good. Ladies and gentlemen, moving along, I would like to welcome the mayor at this moment. As he comes, let's give him a warm welcome, please. Thank you.
Please have your seat, please. Something I could never get used to. You stand to, you don't call anybody you're worshiping. You worship God, not man. Permit me to recognize Ms. Christy Ramnarayan, Mr. Vijay Ramlal, Mr. Mariano Brown, who I've had the opportunity to serve with under Patrick Manning between 2007 and 2010. Mr. Louis Nurse, who was my lecturer when I was a student here, and I closely recall those days when we spent most of the time speaking about Petrotrin. And Petrotrin was a failed institution at the time. And those hours, it was very formative for my thinking at the time. And of course, my guru, Dr. Belgrove, who I would spend several hours here on a Saturday and go home and just hold my head like this, trying to internalize what transpired over a 5-hour period and trying to engage my two sons who were young men in Prima College at the time, and they had no idea what I was talking about. So I said to them on one occasion, you know what, Mr. Belgrove made some investment, and he bought some properties. So where he bought it? Say in space, because that's a new frontier. So he's ahead of his time and thinking. But Mr. Belgrove, I owe you a debt of gratitude and Psalms. And when Mariano spoke about the reception here, I'm not surprised because we expect nothing less from Sam. Like Mariano, I too didn't come prepared because I'm saying, when I look at the panel of speakers, I may have to determine spin from facts. So listening to what was presented so far, I would like to speak from opportunities for San Fernando from a business perspective and where we are. Some years ago, last year it was, I think it is, my staff said that I was invited to a function, a John Maxwell program, leadership program, and it was to be at University of the West Indies. So I got there and I was ushered into a panel like this. And I looked at the head table and I saw something about cocoa and coffee. I said, I think I'm in the wrong place. So I asked an excuse and called the office, and they did some check, and they said, no, that is in San Fernando, and you're in St. Augustine. So I called and I made arrangements to adjust the program, and I got back to San Fernando. And my opening statement was that I used a quote from John Maxwell, where he said that there were 3 captains, fishermen out in the sea, and the weather got bad. And one captain said, well, he will sit and wait for the weather to change. One said that this weather is so terrible, and the other one said, I'll have to adjust my sails. So I was able to adjust my sails when I got there and program myself. But we have to look at entrepreneurship as you sit here and how you position yourself. Some years ago, I was home having dinner, and I saw on the news that the Prime Minister made a decision, government that is, that there'll be no more activities at Queen's Park Savannah. The Parade of the Bands will be around the Savannah, and maybe panorama other events will be held at the Jean Pierre Complex or the Hazel Crawford Stadium. So as a San Fernandian and a Pan person, I saw the opportunity to bring panorama to San Fernando. That was 2006. And this is what entrepreneurship is about, vision. And it took me about 3 months to develop the vision. How will that impact on San Fernando? The San Fernando contractors, transport contractors, will have to transport the likes of Desperados and the Massey, All Stars, and Renegades. That's about 6 or 7 or 10 or 12 40-foot trailers will benefit the city of San Fernando. They'll have to come down 2 days in advance. They'll have to secure location, which will create rental. You'll have to also engage caterers. You'll have to engage labor, so the guys in the back there will have to look after the loading and offloading and take care of them. We'll also have to have opportunities for promotion in Skinner Park. The vendors will get an opportunity. It was tremendous. It was so well executed. Panorama finished about 11:30 in the night. People were saying, well, what do we do? All the bars on Coffee Street and Superior Street were flooded. So it is how you position yourself and how you see the opportunity. Dr. Nurse spoke about electricity, and I was in Norway last week. When we saw, I was in the basement of the hotel, and all the vehicles were plugged into the electrical unit, charging the batteries. And that's probably an inevitable development. A city like San Fernando, for the economy to boom, will be based on physical infrastructure. And Dr. Nurse, in winding up, spoke about 2 events, the Skinner Park project and the waterfront project, because all the technical areas about entrepreneurship and government policies have been outlined. So I don't want to take you through that again. However, how do we treat with that? How do we understand San Fernando over the years? San Fernando, under Governor Chacon in 1854, abandoned San Fernando after he declared the tongue, because his interest was to secure his position in the north, building his fort in St. Joseph, making St. Joseph the capital, so he can maneuver the harbor and see when vessels are coming to take his position. So San Fernando was neglected. But we developed property tax in that era. In 1854, the people of San Fernando decided that we will start paying taxes to take care of ourselves because nobody was looking after us. And there's a whole dichotomy in how San Fernando developed over the years in a very peculiar way. It's very different to Port of Spain because we've always had to look after ourselves. When it was declared last week at the Prime Minister's office that $150 million will be invested in San Fernando, there were those on social media saying, what about the beds in the hospital? What about the parking by the hospital? What about this and that and the other? And not seeing the benefit of Skinner Park investment. We can use Skinner Park. I saw Hazel Crawford running in Skinner Park at age 13. 11 to 13 years group running, representing San Fernando Government School. He was our first gold medalist in the Olympics. Maybe we can produce another Usain Bolt from Skinner Park. So that is an investment. That is branding. We're looking at culture. I saw Jackson 5 performing there, Winifred Atwell performing there as a child. That's the opportunity we can create, like a redound to the people of San Fernando. But the people are commentating, doesn't understand. And I'm speaking about Skinner Park from a perspective where you as entrepreneurs can see how will you fit into that program. $150 million will be invested in the development of an institution that you can be very well a part of. What will be required to run Skinner Park? What is the formation and the scope of Skinner Park? It will be a 3-tier. There will be accommodation for 3,000 persons. There will be a gym, conference room. There will be marketing opportunities. There will be corporate boxes. I'm speaking to you there. How would you fit into that program? The second class ground in phase 2 will be talking about underground parking, a raised surface, a venue for high-end entertainment. Last year, an entrepreneur brought a reggae band from Jamaica called Chronix. I didn't know who Chronix was. So I went to ask my son, who's Chronix? He said, Daddy, he's real big. He's bigger than Bob Marley. I know. So when the guy came to me, again, entrepreneurship, the guy came to me and said, Mr. Galo, I want to bring this reggae band and I want to engage Skinner Park. So let me get back on to you. I didn't see the opportunity because I didn't know. I should have grabbed that place. Well, I'm going to Port of Spain and speak to the people in Port. Well, give me a couple hours. I called my son. Said, there's a guy here talking about Chronix. I don't know who Chronix is. He said, he's bigger than Bob Marley. He's real big. I have never seen people in Skinner Park like that on that night. It was wall-to-wall crowd. No panorama, no calypso fiesta had I ever had an audience like that. So we were able to engage that and talk about a repeat and bringing in other acts to Skinner Park. And that is what you're going to get inside of there, the opportunities and the vision to go forward. I also want to talk about what is the difference between successful countries, or let's put it this way, rich countries and those that are poor. Why are some countries very rich, and why are some countries very poor? As I said before, I didn't prepare, I just wrote this down a little while ago. I want to go take it out, right? And it speaks to two things, institutions, culture, and geography. Those are the three areas. Institutions. On how do we treat institutions? Skinner Park will be an institution, and there'll be opportunities there. But it should be treated and arranged and handled in a very particular, very specific way. It can't be, well, my brother, or my uncle, or my friend, or somebody who I know. It has to be the person, the right person, and the best person to be the manager of the institution, or to look after the interests of the people. It is critical. But in our country, as we know it, and we come into culture here, there's an opportunity to hire somebody, and somebody will tell somebody that. So you're going into an interview for a job, and you have no chance of getting that job, only you have the most qualification. So we have to change the culture in how we do things, our outlook, our behavior, our work ethics, and of course geography, which speaks to our connectivity, our climate. How successful can we be in a climate like this, in this area? The hot sun coming down on us. So if you look at those, and this is very much the opposite to the countries that are successful. So as young entrepreneurs, you have to hold on to those values and those cultures as you move forward. Talk about poor soil, heat and humidity, agriculture, tropical disease, distance, lack of connectivity, bad decisions, and good decisions. And you can only be successful based on good decisions. We're also speaking about the waterfront development. And this is where we're talking about success, because for an economy to drive, it has to be based on physical infrastructure. Physical infrastructure drives an economy. So San Fernando is at the cusp of development at this point. So we have the $150 million Skinner Park, which starts in 10 days' time, and the waterfront, which started already. I wish I was 25 years old, seriously, to be here around this time. This is a very exciting period. Because you get in on that waterfront, you will be amazed about the prospects of the San Fernando waterfront and where it can go, and the opportunities, whether you are an entertainer, whether you want to go into the hotel business, right? There will be a museum there. There'll be a port with vessels going direct to Port of Spain, going to Venezuela and other areas, Deepwater Harbor, fishing. It just goes on and on and on and on. So you should start thinking about that, if you're an entrepreneur and you're based in the South, how you can fit into the program, how you position yourself for the opportunities. So I think that this is exciting. I am very happy to be the mayor at this time. There's all this excitement going on there, and take all the credit for it. But it can only be successful if you, the batch coming out of this school here, and many of the entrepreneurs that start producing under the leadership of Mr. Belgrove and Professor Mills, if I call you that, because you have been prepared by the best for the opportunities. I thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, we're going to open the floor for any questions.
Good afternoon. My name is Glenroy London. I want to wish a hearty welcome to all the participants and to the head table. Okay, and it has been an evening of learning and perspectives and a vision of excitement for successful future. One thing I didn't hear much of, right, from the speakers at the table is the significance of a knowledge-driven economy. Because of all the assets that drive development, right now in the 21st century, knowledge is the most critical of all those assets. And it can be described as the only asset that reinvents itself. Probably it may have been implied, but I did not see a direct strategic perspective and alignment to the role that knowledge management systems can play in carving an economy for Trinidad and Tobago in terms of giving us a competitive, resilient, and robust competitive advantage. So I would be delighted if someone at the table probably can give a perspective on the role that knowledge has to play in forging our economy going forward.
Well, let's start off by taking a little kick at it. And the answer to that is you're absolutely correct. The world of the 21st century, as we speak, is about artificial intelligence and it is about knowledge-driven enterprises. I have to say that at this stage of the game, Trinidad and Tobago is far behind the in Africa, and in terms of what is required for us to move forward. In a sense, you could say that our education system, just take an example of Japan. Use Japan as an example. Now, in a previous administration talked about introducing computers in schools. In the case of Japan, for example, the internet is banned from the primary school. And they only introduce students to the use of the internet at a much more advanced stage. The reason for that is that they have taken a decision and they want to ensure that, that Japan's cultural norms remain embedded in their school structure. So that they focus on basics and on a system of discipline and structure in terms of the type of person they want to build. And artificial intelligence is something that we will expose them to and the use of it at a later stage, but we will give them practical problems at all stages of the game. So I'm using that as an example, just simply to say that they understand that the use of the internet and artificial intelligence as we currently understand it is dominated literally by one culture, by one outlook. And to ensure and to preserve their capacity, not to diminish their technical capacity in terms of being able to address it, because, for example, Japan is one of the more advanced countries in the use of robotics. So it's not to say that that has stopped them from using it or stopped them from being up to date with it. They have taken a position as to where artificial intelligence is going to be in terms of the service of advancing the country as distinct from changing their culture. I put that on the table because we have not taken a position with it from either perspective, either from the point of view how we're going to use it to advance the country, or alternatively from the use of it from how do we develop an individual at the level of the school. In fact, what we're looking at is that our school systems seems to be advancing the wrong things. So I want to put it to you, and this is what I'm going to say, is that it's not so much the use of artificial intelligence or where it's going to carry us, but essentially about ensuring the type of person that we develop that can use and develop in artificial intelligence.
I want to add to that. The issue of knowledge management in Trinidad and Tobago is not about the technology, which is part of the facilitation of knowledge, but it's understanding who we are. And the challenge that we have is that we look outside for everything. We ignore our traditions, we ignore our, for example, herbalists and the stuff that we use like aloe vera. All these little things. We throw out our knowledge And as Mariano said, we importing through technology other forms of knowledge that in fact take us nowhere. So knowledge-based management, for it to be strategic, it has to go back to you, your uniqueness, and the uniqueness of your society. The fact that we can make the pan, the fact that we can make the pan stand, the fact that we have doubles. In other words, there are things that are indigenous that are defined as part of our knowledge, which we treat as just, well, we are accustomed to that. So our culture, the calypso, the soca forms, all the different musical representations of our talent, all these things represent the knowledge that gives us a competitive advantage. There's only one Marshall Montano, there's only one Sparrow. But we throw those things out and we bring in other things. So knowledge management, for it to be a contributor to foreign exchange earnings, must go back to harnessing our research potential from our universities, from those like Cariri and people like that, who can create knowledge and harness knowledge to contribute to the world and the world's need for goods and services. That's where the knowledge management is. And one of the things that we talk about here at the School of Accounting is that we do dissertations by the hundreds every year. People do great research on companies and it goes in people's boxes. It's not used. So but when you go out in the other universities, there are research areas where these papers and journals are being generated every day to add to the capacity of understanding of those societies. So from our point of view, the artificial intelligence and the robotics are the extensions of the technological changes for which knowledge is the being put into that. In other words, the knowledge, these technologies are the vessels. But Trinidad and Tobago, and let me just ask you one thing. Are you aware that there's a tunnel off of Tobago, by Little Tobago, that you could go under Tobago and walk to North America? See? Sounds crazy, eh? What Mr. Nurse talking? The truth is, these are things we don't even know about our own countries. That the Hindus recognize a river in Toku as a part of the Ganges. So some of these knowledge areas, so the people come down here, the Ganges River to us is in India, but then there's somebody who would take a map of the globe, like what you saw by Simpson, you look map of the globe and understand that water is underground, it's veins in the earth. So I just highlighted those two things just for fun, to show you about our knowledge that we don't know. And because we don't know it, it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But we now have to look at our traditions, look at our country, and understand that if you could tell me some other part of the world that have a pitch lake, tell me now. See, we have a pitch lake, but does anybody else have one? And so when we talk about knowledge management, I'm using these examples for us to capture the point that knowledge is indigenous in the diversity of God's creation. And for us to be able to harness knowledge, we must now start to read, we must now start to research, and we must now start to define our uniqueness and our indigenous nature. That is what will give us a competitive advantage. So when we speak to the world, we're not speaking up to them, we are speaking across to them about our Trinidad and Tobago.
I would like to add something to that. At Napraima's college graduation, and I asked in my presentation, how many of you here would like to be doctors? And the majority of hands went up. I said, how many of you would like to be engineers? Same thing. So anybody would like to be a pan tuner? And there was a smirk and giggle, and I was saying something foolish. So I have news for you. A pan tuner makes more money than a doctor and an engineer put together. But you don't know that. You don't know that for that matter. You have no idea. There are 100 and something steel bands in Trinidad that you have to tune, blend, and make pans for. North America alone has over 300 steel bands, and that's just in the university circuit. And a tenor pan costs about 3,000 US. The average band has about 30 tenors. In Trinidad, the average band has 50 tenors. You do the maths. No doctor or lawyer, even combined, can make that kind of money, and there's a shortage of that. I mean, speaking, a couple of years ago, Professor Copeland and I was on a project when we did the G-pans to have it introduced in the University of the West Indies, and we started it. But then there was a change of government in 2010, and those who came in did not understand and abandoned the program. But that is the most lucrative market to have outside there because the demand outside is humongous.
I want to introduce into the conversation a concept that seems to be very much intrinsic in our outlook on how we determine development. Trinidad and Tobago tends to be a metaphorical society. And when we talk about knowledge management, where does knowledge originate? Where does knowledge reside? Who is the embodiment of knowledge? What is the manifestation of knowledge? It is the human capital, human beings. As Dr. Nose rightly said, we were created by God, and we were imbued with knowledge. Everything that exists in the world today, that has been, every activity that has harnessed natural resources and converted those natural resources into added value, into utilities that we use in our daily lives, is knowledge management at work. Every idea that translates into a creation, into an innovation, is knowledge management at work. Every choice that you have made in the marketplace, every commercial engagement and activity is knowledge management at work. As long as we have human beings, knowledge is present. The embodiment of knowledge is people. The second thing I want to throw into the conversation is that we talk about technological development. It's a technological age. From the very creation of man, technology came into being. And Mr. Brown said it, artificial intelligence. So if the intelligence is artificial, it begs the question, where is the natural and real intelligence? It is coming from somewhere. So it is a mechanistic interpretation and application of harnessing the human potential without ascribing the value as a return in compensation for the utility value of that potential into a machine that is not subject to the biological needs and algorithms of the human being. So technology, first and foremost, begins with human beings and ends with human beings. Intelligence amplification is about giving life to machines as if they were humans, to make humans redundant. So there's no wage bill, there's no labor bill. You can program these robots remotely. There's no maternity leave, there's no sick leave, there's no paternity leave. There's no common value interest. So it's really a modern day scenario of seeking to eliminate the need for human beings. So the more we focus on artificial intelligence and intelligence amplification, we are really driving our redundancy and our extinction. And that is something we need to understand very carefully. Mr. Brown is right. Japan has developed a city, and they took 10% of their youth population and put them into that city with no exposure to what is happening in the external world, to ensure the future survivability and sustainability of the Japanese people. Sweden has done the same thing. Germany has done the same thing. Taiwan is doing the same thing. So the things that we are seeking to embody and embrace, they have done that and they say, no, this will not work for us. At the end of the day, our human capital, our human beings, our fellow citizens is the most important value in their development paradigm. So I just want to encourage everyone, when we talk about technology, when we talk about knowledge management, to understand that we neglect the reality and the truth of it and adopt a consumerism, a product that we are sold, that we buy wholesale, and we got to be able to make much more wiser choices.
Good afternoon. My name is Bim Rupnarayan. I'm the dad of Kirsty. My question is probably a continuum of the question and the responses, and it's related to the digital transformation. I heard a lot of good ideas. I'm hearing it all over. Only recently I had a discussion and a meeting at where I work. Well, my question is, what is the national agenda and the national objective and construct with respect to what is Trinidad doing about the digital transformation? What is the roadmap? Where do we see ourselves 5 years and 10 years from today? By employing all of these good ideas and all of these MBAs and so on, and putting it to the national interest and objective of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you.
I think the answer to that is there's no national agenda for digitalization. It goes back to entrepreneurship. In other words, in case you all didn't notice, the governments in the world have become irrelevant. Look around. The British government can't decide whether they want to come out of Brexit or not. In Sudan, the people are marching because they want the government to go. In Algeria, in other words, there's something happening around the world in the consciousness of human development that makes governments and the way they are currently formatted irrelevant. And over the last 5 years, we have seen the Middle East, the Eastern Spring, we have seen people make the changes. And in Trinidad and Tobago, the pole of power has been moved to the private sector. The government have no money. The government is borrowing from the banks to try to maintain what is there. So the digital marketplace is really one of the more free areas. I mean, they're trying to do some regulations now, but it's one of the freer areas where anybody with a phone could jump, do a movie, do a blog, and go up and communicate with the rest of the world. So the digital marketplace really, and the exploitation of it, is come back down to individuals identifying themselves, their own product and service and talent, and sharing that with the world through the digital platforms. Amazon, the example is Amazon produces nothing. Amazon is a marketplace where products and purchasers meet. And in economics, they call it the ideal marketplace. So Trinidad and Tobago will talk about the banks. RBC say they sent home 200 and something people last week because they say they don't need that. And if you want to get a loan, go on Facebook, and in 60 seconds you could apply. So they are all gone towards digital communication and connectivity. Around the world, Uber and all these other things. Amazon bought out Domingos, which is a delivery service for food. But the bottom line is the digital marketplace is the place where individuals, not corporations, individuals have an opportunity. And Trinidad and Tobago government talking about electronic government, all those things are what I would call not strategic. Those are process things. So we are changing our processes to digital. But the digital marketplace is where, in my phone, I have 5,000 friends, and if I post something and I press share, 5,000 people have the opportunity to see it. So social media marketing, the digital space, allows people who have good ideas to sell. So it's for all of us as groups, all of us to get up and actually participate in the digital marketplace.
I would answer that question a different way. I would ask you to go to Inland Revenue Department's division, where they have an online question forum, and ask a question electronically. And you tell me how long it takes for them to respond. All right, because I have done it. About 6 weeks ago, I still waiting on a response. So if I use that as a dummy variable for policy, I will tell you that Trinidad and Tobago government does not have one.
Okay, so we have had some very interesting responses. I didn't tell you much about myself, but I've had the opportunity to work for multinational corporations like BP and others. And we have done like turnarounds on major projects. And what BP has done is they have moved their servers from Trinidad and Tobago to Houston, and they hire knowledge engineers and data engineers. So when they do projects around the world, those data people crunch all the data, and then they are able to have informed opinions on projects around the world and make faster decisions. I was asked to speak to a company in a lunch bag session at Flow. And I asked the group there were about 22 people, how many people are aware of knowledge management? And there was one guy in the room, he was a foreigner. He was a Flow employee from abroad. And the other 21 Trinidadians in there did not have a clue about what knowledge management is. We have companies in Trinidad like BP and Flow and Shell. They all been using knowledge management. BP have been engaged in knowledge management here since 1990. But when we have negotiations with these companies, they don't share it with us, okay? So we remain functioning in the industrial era, right? In a lag, whereas these companies come here, embrace knowledge, and they have collaboration among themselves because it's common technology for them, right? There's a guy called Devon Maraj. We are 2 certified knowledge managers in Trinidad and Tobago. I took it upon myself to go to Washington, Vancouver, to become a certified knowledge manager because I saw that as the future. It is where we are heading. And knowledge rides on the platform of ICT, information technology. It used to be the other way around where IT used to drive it and they realized that wasn't working. Now knowledge drives it. And that is because of Mr. Nurse's statement, Professor Nurse, that it is really the collaboration between people. And to allude to what Mr. Belgrove said, that knowledge has been with us from the beginning. Because before the first book was written, man had knowledge. Man knew there were minerals in the earth that can produce steel, concrete, and other things to drive your phone that makes your phone vibrate. So that knowledge was always there. It's not new. But the thing is, how do we harness that knowledge? How do we massage it to be able to drive decision-making and to prepare prescriptive and predictive systems so that we can have a successful future. So it's a debate that probably should continue. Our schools, our companies should start to engage it because, as I said before, it is the only asset that reinvents itself and that gives us a sustainable, resilient, and robust future. So it's all good. Yeah?
Okay, while we're waiting on someone else to ask a question or make a comment, I just want to acknowledge interesting phenomena here. Mr. Ramai is Worship the Mayor, Kirsty Rupnarain, 2 former students, 2 current students, 2 lecturers. Each one of these students have had the opportunity to be under our stewardship. And I think this is very significant for the current cohort, that you're actually sitting here and listening to your peers who probably came just in terms of maybe 1 or 2 semesters before you. So you've heard the mayor, he came through these corridors. Mr. Ramai came through these corridors. You are currently going through these corridors. And the question that was raised from the knowledge manager, and some of what Mr. Brown also said, is a responsibility that falls to you. This is why this forum is important, for you to understand the dynamics of the changing environment and the responsibilities. If it wasn't done before, it can be done now. And who will do it now? It has to be you. And that's your charge. You are the future engineers and architects of our society. And therefore, you have to step up to the plate. I also want to acknowledge that in any developing society, we have masters, masterminds. We have elder thinkers, prolific thinkers who guides the pathway. And such a person like Mr. Mariano Brown. If you have been listening carefully, you would understand what he has been doing. So the only person on this panel who is really the guest of honor, is the non-ARU person here today, is Mr. Brown. And in any thinking society, we have to always refer, confer, seek audience with, and sit at the feet of our prolific thinkers, who sometimes may become unpopular, but it's in that unpopularity we need to pay more attention. And I'm speaking on many dimensions here. So I want to acknowledge the role that ARU and SAMS is playing in developing our human capital. I'm very proud of the panel. And I also want to say, Mr. Brown, when the discussions was being had as to who, when your name came up, there was no dissenting voice. It was a unanimous board decision. A resolution was passed, and so you are here. Not so, Madam Chair? Thank you. Madam Chair, you say something.
Hi, good afternoon again, once again, to everyone. I would like to thank everyone for your participation and your contribution to make this event successful today. You can give yourself a round of applause. And if there is no further business, I now duly adjourn this meeting.